This video is sponsored by World Anvil.
Change can be scary. Be not afraid.
It's awards season, everybody's looking back at the movies and TV shows and other media from the past year and celebrating their favorites. But I haven't watched a new movie since Dune 2. Instead of watching any new TV shows, I've recently been binging the Jackie Chan adventures. I'm not remotely qualified to talk about the past year of new releases, is my point. However, I am qualified to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. I've used the 2014 Player's Handbook to create literally hundreds of characters. Some characters that I've played, others that I've created for my friends to play, others that I've created for previous videos on this channel, and a whole bunch more that I created just for fun. And so in the spirit of awards season, I thought this is the perfect time to go back and celebrate my favorite player options from the 2014 Player's Handbook. It doesn't mean that these are the best player options. I'm not one of those guys who tends to care a lot about balance. There are other channels that have made videos talking about the best character options. These are purely subjective, just my favorites. This video was actually commissioned by one of my patrons, Garlock, who wanted to know my favorite class, subclass feature, race, feat, and spell from D&D. I've been meaning to get to this video for a while, so here we are, my favorite of each of those categories from the 2014 Player's Handbook. Now you might be wondering, why only that one book? Was that specifically the request from Garlock? And no, they actually asked me to include my favorites from all D&D products, from Wizards of the Coast to third-party publishers. But the truth is, I've very rarely used any material outside of just the Player's Handbook. I've used a little bit from Volo's or Xanathar's or Tasha's, but even then, pretty minimally. The truth is, most of my time as a player was in the first 5 years of 5th edition, and while I did like some of the other options from other books, I really didn't use them nearly as often as I used the Player's Handbook. Most of my third-party products are designed for Game Masters. I have very few that are meant for players, so I haven't really gotten a chance to take any of those for a spin, and that's something I would love to change someday down the road. I really want to play in or run a game for some friends who I know would jump at the chance to take some third-party player options for a spin. Maybe I'll get a chance to do that later this year or sometime next year, even just as a one-shot. But I just would not consider myself well-versed enough in any other player material to consider myself an expert in which ones would be my favorites. Because this is completely subjective, a lot of my favorites will be determined entirely by my own experience with the game. And I want to broaden that experience a bit more, but for right now, I just feel like celebrating my favorite player options from D&D, and all of those happen to be in the 2014 Player's Handbook. That's not like a commentary on any of the other material that's out there. It's just how I would define the most accurate way to describe my experience with the game. So if you're here for just some low-stakes fun where I just take you into a little bit of my own personal preferences, that's what this is going to be today. And I'm sure, like any award ceremony, all of my choices will be completely uncontroversial, and this video will probably be very short and concise. So without further ado, welcome to The Super Geeks! And I'm going to jump right into our first category, my favorite class. Algebra. Get it? My favorite class is algebra. That's everyone's favorite part of an awards show, right? Where the presenters do cringy comedy. God, this is not the point of the video, but while we're on the subject, I fucking hate the Oscars. Not because the selections are bad, although sure, that's part of it. But I am so tired of watching A-list actors forced to do middle school skits. So we're not going to do any of that. That was my one little gift to myself. We're just going to announce the winners. And the winner of this category is... So I was originally going to have an envelope, but then I left the envelope in my wife's car and she drove with it to work. I was also going to dress in a suit, and then I realized I don't really want to do that. So this is the video we're getting. It's a low-stakes video. We're only talking about my favorite aspects of the game. It's not a big deal. The winner of my favorite class is the Wizard. Look, let's be honest. You're probably already aware of that. If you're a fan of this channel for a long time, you know that all of my Patreon tiers are named after wizard spells. I tend to make wizards when I do my character creation videos, or at least that's my default more often than not. I had an algorithm wizard running around in all my videos last year, and last week I put out a video where I insisted that Doctor Strange 2 is a good movie, not because of the way it treats Wanda Maximoff as a character. Absolutely not because of that, but just because the wizard magic in that movie is neat. So yeah, my favorite class is the Wizard. And it's funny because before 5th edition, I was absolutely not the type of player who focused on magic. I didn't feel like I could get my head around it very easily. I've played spellcasters in the past, but really only in 4th edition, where all the characters were basically as complex as each other. For more than a decade, even well after I started playing 5th edition, I used to insist that I had to play a straightforward, martial character anytime I played a new system, because that was the best way for me to learn the system. It was the best way for me to get a baseline to understand the game, and then I'd be more willing to add in the complexity of being a spellcaster. Now, I still think that can be a good approach, and it worked well for the type of player I was at the time. But it does mean that I didn't play a lot of spellcasters until around 5th edition. I played a cleric during the D&D Next playtest, and honestly, I played a lot of clerics for the first few years of 5e, because I think clerics are fun, and they're extremely valuable to a party. I would always choose my characters last, I would wait for everyone else to choose their class first, and then I would build a character based off of what I felt the party needed, and a lot of times that meant I made a cleric. And other people would try to comfort me, oh, sorry that you had to choose a cleric, and I feel like they were missing out, actually, because I thought clerics were a lot of fun. Then over the next couple of years, my focus shifted, and I realized, you know what, I really like having arcane magic more than divine magic, but I still like being able to heal people, so I think my favorite might be the College of Lore Bard. After all, you get access to a bunch of my favorite spells through magical secrets, but you also get access to healing magic, so it's a nice balance. I refer to the Bard as my favorite class in one of the first videos on my channel, but I've played a few more Bards since then, and ultimately, I'm pulling back on my opinion that they're my favorite. First of all, I don't think they're my favorite class if I really only liked playing one subclass, the College of Lore. Second, if the reason I like that class, or even that subclass, has so much to do with magical secrets, a feature you don't get until 6th level in College of Lore, or 10th level in the base class, well, then that means the early levels are just a lot less fun for the way I enjoy playing the game. But for the first few years of 5e, I also played a wizard from levels 1 to 20 in a campaign that ended in 2018. And over the past few years since that game ended, I've realized how much I miss playing wizards. Part of that has to do with the flavor of the class. As I already made clear in last week's video, I love Doctor Strange, but also when you're looking at the whole concept that you're poring over these tomes of arcane knowledge to make yourself more powerful, that's what we do as D&D players. We pour through reference books looking for cool powers. I think the wizard archetype is extremely versatile as well. You're physically probably pretty frail, but magically very powerful, and there's a lot of different ways you can interpret that idea into very interesting and distinct characters. I love the different ways you can flavor your magic, I just talked about that recently, and the different ways you can flavor your spell book as well. I love picking out actual physical journals that I can write my spells in real life and bring to the table to basically act as a totem for my character. And I love thinking about the different ways this character interacts with magic or material components and finding a cool gimmick for the character. And I love that the class basically dips itself into every other type of spellcasting in the game. With most arcane spellcasters, you have the spells that you know, and that's it. You don't get to swap them out with anything. You just have access to the same set of tools until you level up. On the other hand, you've got the divine casters who can commune with their god or with nature and swap out any of their spells whenever they take a long rest. The wizard kind of splits the difference. You choose what spells go into your spell book, you choose those from the full list of wizard spells, but then on any individual day, you can prepare which of those spells you want to take. I used to think that was the most complex version of spellcasting because it kind of has its foot in each of the different spellcasting camps. But I've since realized that playing a wizard is actually so much easier because you get the versatility that you don't get with the other arcane casters, which are just locked into the same spells for their entire level. A wizard can look at the situation they're in and take time at the beginning of the day to prep the spells that they think are going to be the most useful during the day. And that's a fun challenge. It's something that I really came to enjoy because once you accept that you will always regret at least one of your choices and wish you'd taken something else, you can make your peace with that fact and just have fun trying to guess what sort of day you're going to have and preparing the magic you might need. But you're also only choosing each day from a limited pool, much smaller than the list of spells that clerics and druids are choosing from every day, which means you don't have to try to have that same encyclopedic knowledge of every spell on your class's spell list. That's one of the reasons I find druids so daunting and why I have no interest in criticizing Marisha Ray for not knowing her spells. I've never played a druid, but I've played a lot of clerics, and it can be kind of exhausting keeping up with all these different spells and trying to make sure you remember all of your options and choose the right one for any given day, especially at the higher levels I never got to, which is pretty much exclusively where we saw Marisha play Keyleth. And she also had to keep track of different wild shapes, and because she's a moon druid, she also has to know a whole bunch more wild shapes than any other type of druid would want to know. No thank you. I used to think the wizard was a pretty complex class, but now I think it's actually a really great way of figuring out what kind of spellcasting you enjoy the most. Do you like just having a consistent list, and you rarely ever swap out your spells on a long rest? Okay, you're probably not going to get as much out of playing a cleric or a paladin. That's good to know. You might prefer the arcane casters. Or do you prefer having access to this larger library, and you wish you could choose from an even larger list every time you take a long rest? Well, then you're probably not going to want to play a bard or a sorcerer or a warlock. You're probably going to prefer a cleric or a druid. And if you like the balance of the wizard specifically, keep playing wizards. It rules. With a wizard, anytime you swap out the spells you only have to look at your character sheet. You don't have to look at these whole huge long reference of all the wizard spells. Huh. That was weird, but so that's the new 2024 wizard. And as it turns out, everything I was just talking about isn't 100% true anymore. So, as you probably know, in 2024, we got a new version of D&D that is very similar, really just a few quality of life improvements across the board. I kind of wish there had been a clearer design mandate. I think that would have been really interesting, but I still like what we wound up getting for the most part. And the wizard actually changed very little between 2014 D&D and 2024 D&D, but there was one pretty significant change. Now, with this version of the wizard, anytime you take a long rest, you can swap out one of your cantrips, your level 0 spells, for a new one. And initially, I did not like this change. Why are we adding so much more complexity for spellcasting players? Isn't part of the fun of choosing spells at level 1 that you have to work with whatever you're given, and you can't just swap them out every time you take a long rest? Now, if you're a prepared caster, you can also basically prepare your cantrips. Don't clerics and druids have enough spells to worry about without also having to swap out their cantrips? But then I checked the book more thoroughly, and I realized, no, every other class in the game still has to choose their cantrips at level 1. They can swap out a cantrip when they level up, but that's it. The wizard is the only class who can swap out a cantrip on a long rest. And they can only change out one cantrip at a time, so that helps to address what I was worried about. You still have to feel like you're making the best with the cantrips you have access to, because aside from being able to change one of them, you're still locked into the others for that day. But I realized this change is specifically here to help the wizard feel like it has a more distinct class identity at level 1, and I actually really like what that says about the wizard. Cantrips are supposed to be these spells that you've cast so often, you can just cast them without expending any magical energy. No spell slots required, you've mastered these spells. But for a wizard, the whole idea is that you're studying different spells and learning how to produce them, so at what point during your adventuring career are you also taking the time to learn a new cantrip and master it? That always felt a little convenient to me whenever you learned a new cantrip at higher levels. And this helps solve that problem. Now in your journey to become a wizard, a level 1 wizard, you've already mastered all the cantrips, which means you can start swapping them out, exchanging one of them during a long rest. And as you level up, you don't learn new cantrips, you're just able to hold more cantrips in your head during a day. It's a very, very minor change, but I actually think it does a really excellent job of capturing everything I think is cool about the class and representing it at first level in a new way. Additionally, they changed it so that you can swap out one of your higher level spells, level 1 or higher, during a short rest, which, again, makes perfect sense. If you can already consult your spellbook to refresh some of your spell slots during a short rest, why couldn't you also swap out one of those spells? It wouldn't have occurred to me to change that, but again, I think that really helps capture what I think is fun about this class. The way you can change out your spells by interacting with your spellbook. If you can change all of your spells on a long rest, and if you can refresh your spell slots on a short rest through that same method of reviewing your spellbook, then I think it does make sense that you could swap out a spell on a short rest, since you're doing the same thing with both those methods. The only other change that I could see is that your 18th level feature, where you can make certain first level spells free to cast, is now only limited to spells that take an action to cast, so no more reaction spells. It's a shame, because I did always enjoy having some free castings of Shield in the chamber, but as Will from D&D Shorts pointed out in a video a couple of years ago, this was almost certainly changed because of Silvery Barbs. And as annoying as it is that this one spell managed to completely break the game for a couple of years, to the point where we now have to redesign aspects of the game so this spell is not so powerful, I ultimately think that this is a pretty minor change, and at the end of the day, I really like the new wizard. I am really looking forward to the chance where I get to play a wizard using the 2024 rules. But that's a topic for another day, I'm sure, and I doubt that'll be relevant again throughout this video, so let's move on to the next category. My favorite subclass. And the winner is the Wild Magic Sorcerer. Look, this was still a pretty competitive field. I like the College of Lore Bard, like I said. I like the Moon Druid, even though I haven't played it myself. It's a little intimidating, but tempting all the same. I like the Samurai Fighter. I like the Abjuration Wizard. But come on, there's absolutely no contest. I love the Wild Magic Sorcerer. Is it the best class mechanically? Does it have the best options for you as a player? Is it balanced compared to the other Sorcerer subclasses? I don't know, to be honest, I don't really care. The core mechanic at the heart of this subclass is so much fun, I literally don't know or care if the rest of the subclass carries its weight or not, because I love the Wild Magic Surges. Also, technically, Garlock asked me for my favorite subclass feature, not my favorite subclass overall, so this would still count, but honestly, either way, the Wild Magic chart is so much fun, it makes this my favorite subclass, regardless of any of the other subclass mechanics. If you're not familiar with how this works, whenever you cast a leveled spell as a Wild Magic Sorcerer, your GM can make you roll a d20 to see if Wild Magic is triggered. If you roll a 1, then there's a surge of wild magic and you roll on this chart to see what the effect is. You can also use Tides of Chaos to give yourself advantage on a spell attack, but you can't use that again until the GM makes you roll on the wild magic table, which means the GM could either make you roll immediately so you get access to the feature again and you can keep potentially triggering wild magic more often, or the GM can just sit on this option and wait until the funniest moment to force you to make another wild magic roll at the most inconvenient time. You're probably getting a pretty strong sense of why I love this subclass so much. It feels like an invitation for the GM to fuck with you a little bit, with the understanding that the GM also cannot get upset when the results of the chart take the game in an unexpected direction. It's an opportunity for both the player and the game master to give up some level of control. I talked about this a bit in my last video, but I struggle with relinquishing control as a game master, especially when I have ideas for future stories that I'm trying to set up down the road. One of the things that I need to work on is letting go of the reins a little bit and focusing more on the fun of an individual session rather than only working on setting up future adventures. But I'll be honest, when I have a wild magic sorcerer in my party, I don't need to worry about that problem at all. I'm immediately willing to throw away all of my plans and just see what happens, because I know that the unpredictable results of the wild magic chart are going to be so much more interesting and spontaneous and random and still delightful than anything I've got planned for the session overall, let alone for any future hypothetical sessions down the road. And as a player, I can also definitely be an overplanner, as you might expect from someone whose favorite class is a wizard. Some of my worst moments as a player have been when I've basically tried to force everyone in the party to stick with my prescribed plan, whether or not the plan was actually any good or not. But when I'm playing a wild magic sorcerer, all of that goes out the window. I still like to make plans, but I'm also just so much more willing to embrace the chaos that might arise from gameplay. Playing with a wild magic sorcerer subclass, whether I'm a player or a game master, actually makes me a more cooperative player at the table. Also, I just love this chart. It's got 50 fantastic, hilarious, chaotic results. 25 results. In D&D 2024, there are only 25 results now. And you know what? At first glance, that does kind of suck a lot. Although, that sounds like they've eliminated half the results, and that's actually not true. Some of them have just been grouped together if they share a lot in common. For example, most of the results where your body changes have now been grouped together. Most of the results where you regain hit points or spell slots are grouped together. All the results where you summon another creature for 1 minute have now been grouped together. And most of the results where you can cast a spell have also been grouped together. On the one hand, that's a shame. There used to be such a high chance that you would cast a spell, or your body would change, or you would summon another creature, and now all those are a little bit less likely. But on the other hand, I still enjoy it when you have to roll in the wild magic table, and then you have to roll another die to see which spell you cast. It helps build up the anticipation for the final result. It's not going to break the flow of the game overall. I don't like it as much, but I still like it. They also changed some of those spells so you didn't cast them on yourself anymore, and I can't say that I'm upset that you can't cast Confusion on yourself anymore. I think that was always not a very fun result for everybody at the table. It sounds like it would be fun, but then it actually happens, and it's not. It's just kind of a letdown. But I did kind of like that there was an option where you'd cast Fireball on yourself. That was such a hilarious, iconic result. Although, that being said, it did basically make this subclass unplayable until you had a lot more hit points, because otherwise you were literally playing Russian roulette, probably with your entire party. Now, these days the sorcerer doesn't get their subclass until 3rd level, but even so, if Fireball is still potentially going to be cast on you and your friends, that's still going to be deadly if you're all at 3rd level. But also, especially back in 2014 D&D, when you got your subclass, in the sorcerer at least, at level 1, you might not want to cast any spells at all, because there's this risk you could wind up rolling for a fireball and killing everybody. In fact, there's literally this story on Reddit, one of my favorites ever, where a party of new players had their characters meet in a tavern, the sorcerer cast Detect Magic on the quest giver, rolled the exact numbers you need in order to trigger wild magic, and then the fireball result, and they blew up the entire party in the first 10 minutes of the game. And the Redditor was posting this and going, like, okay, what do we do now? And the response from everyone in the comments was like, enjoy the fact that you had the most D&D experience possible. And it's true. That is a moment that could literally only happen in a game like D&D. You're never going to see that in a video game or a novel or a TV show where your main characters blow themselves up immediately. It's just the wild unpredictability of role-playing games. But also, the first 10 minutes of your very first session is kind of the only time where that could happen, where it could be any fun at all, because any later than that, you're not going to think it's hilarious that these characters you've been invested in blew themselves up for absolutely no reason when they were level 2 or 3. You're going to be kind of upset instead. So, as iconic as it was that you could cast Fireball on yourself, now you can just cast a Fireball. And you can still choose where it goes, because it has to go somewhere, and that can still lead to a whole lot of chaos. There's a whole Marvel movie that kicks off because Scarlet Witch essentially casts Fireball away from herself, doesn't hurt any of her friends, but it still goes very, very poorly. You can still use this as an interesting moment to send the story in a brand new direction. Don't worry about that. It's just not necessarily going to be instant death for you and your fellow player characters. And I guess that's good, even though I liked the instant death option. You know, it's probably good that it's not there anymore. When it comes to the numbers on the chart, again, there's some stuff to like now and some other stuff I like less. Turning into a potted plant is still its own discrete result. It's not lumped in with the other body changes, so that's good. There's still a 1 in 25 chance that you're going to get turned into a potted plant. That rules. But the number for that transformation is now 37 through 40, which means it's not number 42 anymore, which is a shame because turning into a potted plant was a reference to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. 42 is also a number from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, so even though those two aspects of the book didn't have that much to do with each other, it was still neat that they were connected. It was a reference that you could understand. That being said, I am now obsessed with the highest possible result you can get on this chart. If you roll a 97 through 100, then you roll a d6. And depending on the results, you might regain some spell slots or some hit points, or your allies might regain some hit points. Good things can happen. But if you get a 6, the highest roll you can get on this die roll, then you go look at the results for rolling a 17 through 20, which are all the different body modifications except for the potted plant. Only instead of rolling a d8 to see which one takes effect, all 8 results happen to you simultaneously. So for 1 minute, you're surrounded by faint ethereal music, and your size increases by 1 size category, and you grow a long beard made of feathers, and you must shout when you speak, and illusory butterflies appear around you, and an extra eye appears on your forehead, and pink bubbles float out of your mouth when you speak, which again, you can only shout, and your skin turns blue. And that last one doesn't last for just 1 minute. That's permanent now until you can get it magically removed. So now we know why the potted plant is not grouped with the other body modifications, because you want all these to be able to happen simultaneously, and a lot of them just wouldn't matter if you were a potted plant for a while. Although this also doesn't really explain why the potted plant isn't number 42 anymore, but still. Even though I was initially irked by the changes to this chart overall, in looking at it a little bit more, thinking about it a little bit more, I think it's still a really solid chart. Likewise, there's a result where you have to cast a spell on yourself, but they had the good sense to keep the reincarnate results separate from that, so there's still a 1 in 25 chance that you'll get the result that says that if you die within the next minute, you'll come back to life as if by the reincarnate spell, which is fantastic because that is my favorite spell in the game. My favorite spell. Oh. Spoilers, I guess. It's Reincarnate. It's a 5th level spell. It's only available for druids. They get it at the same level clerics get raised dead, so it's another resurrection option if you don't happen to have a cleric in your party or if the cleric is dead. And once again, it's a more chaotic result. You make a brand new body for the person you're resurrecting, and you roll in this chart to find out what ancestry they are, because it's completely random. Or the GM can just decide what ancestry you come back as, but come on, that's so boring. Embrace chaos. Embrace change. Okay, I should have seen that one coming. That's on me. Honestly, the spell hasn't changed that much. Some wording is a little bit different. It no longer specifies that the new body is the body of an adult, which is probably a good idea if you happen to have this, cast the spell on a child. It's a good detail to get rid of, that they're not suddenly an adult. Now there's no mention of the age of the body at all, so it's up to you and your group to figure out what makes the most sense. But the only difference in the chart is that no longer are there different results for different sub-races. You just get the results of a certain species, and then the spell tells you that you as a player get to make any other decisions that come along with that species. And that includes, for example, if you're an elf, you decide whether or not you're coming back as a high elf or a wood elf or a drow. If you come back as a tiefling, you can decide whether you're infernal, abyssal, or chthonic. And of course, this also allows you to choose other sub-ancestry options from other books. Like if you rolled that you're coming back as an elf, you could decide you're coming back as a sea elf. If the chart says Dragonborn, you can decide if you're a Gemstone Dragonborn. It's funny, I always used to make my own version of the Reincarnate chart. Every time a new D&D book came out, I would include all the other sub-races and other species from other sources, which means I had to add in all the different percentages and do a lot of math and figure out how to make it as balanced as possible. And while this version doesn't fold in any other species, it doesn't mean you don't have to worry about any sub-races anymore. You can just let the player choose as they're redoing their stats. Now, this version still allows the GM to choose the species themselves, and that just seems so weird to me. Like, why would you do that? Although, I guess I tend to run my games in worlds that very specifically have all of the ancestries from the player's handbook, but I understand, I guess, not all GMs are the same way. If you don't really vibe with the idea of Aasimar or Tieflings or Dragonborn, and you don't want to include them in your world, or you don't want your players to be able to play orcs because you just want orcs to be the bad guys, or you're just running a human-centric game or a dwarf-centric game, and allowing a completely random result would not just screw up the campaign, but actually conflict with the way you've presented the world so far, I could see that being a really good reason to choose the result of the spell rather than allowing it to be a random roll. So as much as I'm a fan of embracing randomness and change, I guess I understand why they didn't change that part of the spell. My favorite race. Oh man, I don't know. I guess Mexicans? My favorite D&D race. Oh, sure, that makes a lot more sense. And the winner is half-elves. Don't get me wrong, I like playing humans more than I think a lot of D&D players do. I like playing elves, I like dragonborn, I like tieflings. But half-elves are my favorites. I like the boost to charisma because I like playing charisma characters like bards or paladins or even just charismatic versions of other classes like charismatic wizards. I'm a talker, I like playing talkers. I like the versatility that comes from the other abilities score bonuses being placed wherever you want them and getting extra skills of your choice and extra languages of your choice because they really demonstrated how the half-elf was so versatile compared to most other ancestries. And yes, Tasha's changed how races work, so now you can get a similar bonus without having to choose this ancestry. But fortunately for me, that's not the only reason I like half-elves. I also like the built-in story hook that comes from playing a character of 2 different ancestries. I love the idea of playing a character who belongs to 2 different worlds but doesn't feel at home in either one. Characters like Hellboy, where the legions of hell have high expectations for him, and yet he has far more affection for humans, even though he'll never be one of them. Or Superman, somebody who's a member of this entirely alien culture, but has far more affection for humans, and yet, because of his nature, it's difficult for him to be fully himself among humans, because some of them will always distrust him. I love the tension of growing up among a group that you're not really a part of. Even my first D&D character wasn't a half-elf, but he was a human raised by elves. I think that's just an idea that's always appealed to me. I think the half-elf has always provided a really fun opportunity for those kinds of stories. And they took him away. Now, let's be clear, the way 2024 D&D works, you can still play ancestries from previous editions. It's not the end of the world. But the half-elf wasn't omitted from the player's handbook because of space or because of balance issues. It was omitted because the designers are really trying to rethink the way we handle different creatures in D&D. First of all, the different playable ancestries aren't called races anymore because the idea behind that term was using it the same way we use it in the context of something like the human race. But obviously the word race has other implications as well in the Western world, and a lot of those implications make D&D races seem a lot more complicated in terms of how we talk about them and what that term implies. Obviously that was not deliberate, and nobody really thinks it was, but you know, part of being a writer means understanding that some of the words you choose might carry different implications that change the way your audience interacts with the work. So in this case, now they just use a different word. Different player options are called species instead of race. Now, I know some people in the community think that word sounds a little bit too sci-fi, too formal, but I also know there are some people in the community who really prefer that term because they like the idea that these are different species. They feel like that's the best way to explain why elves and dwarves all get different magic powers based on their blood or whatever. They must literally be like alien species to each other. These also tend to be folks who don't like the idea of half-elves or half-orcs because they feel like these creatures must be so genetically different and diverse that they would be more like alien species, so they really wouldn't be able to crossbreed if you actually think about it logically. Now, personally, that's never really been an issue for me because, partially, unlike aliens, these are creatures in a magical world. I have no trouble believing that a dwarf and an elf could procreate. But also, that's not something that bothers me in sci-fi most of the time, either, depending on the genre. Like, I'm not a big Star Trek guy, but I do know that Spock is half human and half Vulcan. I know there's a character on the new show who's a combination of 2 different species as well. Like, I'm fine with aliens having babies with humans if it leads to more interesting stories. Being a nerd in the early 2000s honestly meant having to hear a lot of these kinds of conversations, even before the Reddit or things like that. I heard so many hot takes about how Superman and Lois could never have kids or even have sex because his sperm would annihilate her egg, or, as some people were very keen to explain, annihilate the condom, and maybe even detonate her torso. That was an idea that literally made it into a deleted scene from Hancock. They filmed it. Not happening to someone, but the risk that it would pose. But even without that weird sort of, they literally can't touch each other aspect of it, it was still just taken as a given by so many people that Clark could not have a baby with Lois if he had his powers. Like, they could still be intimate in safe ways, but it was literally a plot point in All-Star Superman that humans and Kryptonians were just too different to reproduce together. That was just taken as a given. But then eventually, Clark and Lois had some kids in the comics and on TV because some writers thought it would be a neat story, and it turns out it was fine. We were all making a big deal out of nothing for like 70 years. But also, the stated reason there are no half-elves or half-orcs in the new player's handbook is because, according to Jeremy Crawford, the co-creator of 5e and 5.5, he considered the concept to be, quote, racist, or at least kind of racist. And okay, I don't think that's really the best way to explain it, but I think I get where he's coming from. I don't think it's a critique of the bioessentialism arguments of having different species having different magic powers, because that's still the case with D&D species. That's essential enough to the core concept that they didn't change that. However, I think there is a reasonable argument that including species like half-elves and half-orcs and tieflings can be a problem if you include some lore that says they are all specifically discriminated against because of how they're born. Now, I personally have no problem establishing something like that exists in a fantasy world. Fantasy prejudice for being born in two different groups makes sense to me. I think it can lead to interesting stories. But I'm also not going to pretend that some of those stories can be kind of extremely problematic, especially when they're handled by people who aren't taking proper care to be respectful of the concept. Sure, I think a lot of people, especially a lot of nerds, can absolutely relate to feeling like an outsider. But that's not really the same thing as relating to prejudice, or being born a certain way that prompts a lot of prejudice. And historically, when people try to tell stories about being persecuted for how they were born, but they don't share that experience themselves, it can be a real toss-up as far as how well they actually handle the topic in question. Like, listen, we're all adults, and we're also all nerds. I'm sure we can all think of at least one example of some piece of pop culture that tried to tell a story about prejudice where persecuted people are fictional creatures, but they mangled the metaphor or just dropped the ball in some major way. Doesn't mean the story is bad, it just means that the implications are bad. Now, that doesn't mean people shouldn't still be able to tell whatever stories they want to at their own tables. I think that's completely fine. But I do think that the team at Wizards of the Coast just wanted to remove any chance that it was their own mechanics and their own default lore that was basically encouraging you to roleplay racism. Personally, I would just prefer they give the game master enough guidance to be able to handle that subject matter respectfully and thoughtfully. It doesn't seem like that'd be that difficult to do. Just include one of the paragraphs like you had in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. You don't need much more than that. But they didn't go that way. Now, unfortunately, this is not made clear in the book itself, but the intended design of D&D 2024 is that if you want to play a character who is a hybrid of two different species, you just play the mechanics of one of them and flavor your character so they're a combination of both. Again, I can't find that anywhere in the player's handbook. It's certainly not in any of the sections that specifically talk about your species. Maybe it's hidden somewhere else in the book that I haven't found it, but we know from interviews that this is their approach to half species. Are you playing a half-elf? Well, decide whether you want to use the stats of a human or an elf and just describe how your character has pointy ears and a beard. They are flavor-wise a half-elf, but mechanically either an elf or a human. It's not the most comprehensive way to handle this topic. We've seen other supplements tackle this topic with a lot more detail and nuance, like the Elf and Orc Had a Little Baby supplements on the DM's Guild. But for the official player's handbook, the designers were a lot more cautious. Again, I would argue they were too cautious. Like, even without the other paragraph I just talked about, they should have at least included a single line about how they want you to handle combination characters. Like, what's the harm in a sentence that just says, yes, you can play a half-elf, just use the mechanics from one species and flavor them to be a blend of both. And then for other campaign settings, they could maybe include more details for not just how to handle the mechanics, but also how to handle the role-playing of playing a character of mixed ancestry in that setting. I believe I have heard that the new Eberron book does this with half-elves specifically, or maybe it was the old Eberron book. I don't know, I haven't had a chance to dig into Eberron too much yet, but it is on my list to check out someday soon, so we'll see if I've heard that correctly, and if that book maybe has some more guidance on how to play half-elves. And of course, if we ever get another Dragonlance book, I think it would be pretty important to make it clear in that product that half-elves are discriminated against and give some guidance in how to handle that at the table, because that is a major part of the stories told in that setting, and that's something that a player needs to know before they make their characters. But I'm not sure I have the highest hopes that the folks at Wizards of the Coast are going to give future players that much information, even when I think it would enrich the play experience for everybody at the table. But if you're looking for ways to give your players information about your world before they make their characters, or during your campaign as they learn new secrets about your world, then you should use today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is a fantastic toolkit you can use to create wiki-style articles for everything in your world. This includes monsters, NPCs, magic items, locations, factions, traditions, gods, religions, and so much more. You can make guidelines so your players know what material they can use when creating their characters, and have it all centrally located in the same place. You can also link to other articles about the lore of your world. So for example, if you do allow half-elves and half-orcs to exist in your world, you can include a link to some specific xenophobic faction that's trying to take away their rights, or to a page about a particularly charismatic leader who's trying to advocate for equality. It's a great way to get your players thinking about how the details of your world are going to impact the character they want to create, something we will talk about in more detail in another video very, very soon. And then once you're actually playing your game, you can actually run your game through the website. World Anvil has a fantastic digital DM screen option where you can access all the information you need to have at your fingertips in order to run your game. and even roll your dice right there on the website. And World Anvil is offering a discount to the viewers of this channel. If you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 51% off of any annual membership. That's more than half off. Once again, that's worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. My favorite feat. And the winner is... it's a tie between the Alert feat and the Warcaster feat. Once again, I know that these are probably not everyone's favorites, certainly not Alert. Not only am I not somebody who worries about min-maxing or optimizing or finding the best builds, but also for most of my time as a 5e player, my group didn't use feats. That wasn't universal by any means, but we generally treated them as an optional rule and not one we typically used a lot. But I played with some feats, and overall I think these have been my two favorites. Warcaster is just an extremely good feat. That one probably is high on a lot of lists. You have an advantage on concentration checks to maintain a spell, you perform the somatic components for your spells even when your hands are full of weapons and shields, and when you make an opportunity attack, you can cast a spell instead of making a melee attack. If you're playing a spellcaster, this is basically an essential feat to take. Even if you don't take it at level 1, which you probably should, you're definitely going to wind up taking it the next chance you have. But I also really like the Alert feat. You get a +5 bonus to your initiative, you can't be surprised while you're conscious, and if you can't see an opponent, they don't get advantage on their attacks against you. It's a very good feat, and while it might not be everybody's favorite, I really like it. Right. Well, much like someone with the Alert feat, I shouldn't be that surprised that that happened. Jokes aside, I still have no idea what's going on. This doesn't really fit with the whole awards show premise. This seems like a different thing entirely. But, well, yeah, let's talk about how these feats changed. Warcaster didn't really change at all. Some of the wording got tweaked, but mechanically it seems exactly the same. The only difference is that you can't take it at level 1 now because of the new way feats are organized, where some of them are intended for you to take at level 1 and others are more powerful, and you're made to take them at higher levels. This is good. I like this design. I know it probably frustrates some people that they can't take their favorite super powerful feats at level 1, and I sympathize completely, but I also think this is just better design across the board. And lucky for me, Alert is an origin feat, so you can still take it at level 1. Although it's pretty wildly different now. They've taken away the power to avoid being surprised, they've taken away the fact that you negate the benefits of being attacked by an invisible or hidden creature, and they've even changed the initiative bonus. Now you just add your proficiency bonus to your initiative score. Which is probably better design, if I'm being honest. Having a +5 is really powerful and cool, but if you're going to basically insist that if someone takes this feat, they have to do so at level 1, I think it probably does make sense to have it scale as you level up, because +5 is so powerful, but something that starts as +2 and then gradually raises as you level up, that makes sense. However, this new ability the feat gives you is the option to swap initiative with somebody immediately after you roll initiative. You can swap initiative with a willing ally as long as they're not incapacitated. This sounds like so much fun to me. Yes, obviously it was super nice to never be surprised and for invisible creatures to not get advantage on you, but I don't even think I remember that last option was available to me whenever I played an Alert character. It was kind of a passive ability that I just forgot about because I was so focused on not being surprised and having a +5 to my initiative. This ability to swap initiative is a lot more active. It's something that I think I'm going to think about every time we roll initiative, and it would be really, really fun to try to figure out where I needed to fall in the initiative lineup and who I might petition to swap places with. I like this a lot. And it's a nice way to essentially make up for losing that +5, because on any given initiative roll, depending on who you swap with, you could wind up with a +1 or a -4, or you get like a +17 if you swap with someone who rolled much, much higher than you did, and is willing to swap with you. But honestly, from what I could tell, a lot of feats replace the +5 or flat bonuses they were given with your proficiency bonus instead. So this is a nice way to also give you a little bit of extra benefit without just taking that modifier away. So now that we are done with the categories I received from Garlock, let's move on to the final portion of this broadcast. Remembering those we've lost. In Memorium, Feeblemind. Now, I'm sure there are other spells that didn't make the transition from 2014 to 2024. I haven't gone through all of them. But, you know what? Like any In Memoriam segment of an awards show, there's always going to be somebody that we missed. But when I was doing research for my video from last week about what your spellcasting can look like, I found that one of my favorite spells is gone. This is Feeblemind, 8th level. When you cast the spell, your target takes 4d6 psychic damage, and they have to make an intelligence saving throw, and if they fail, their intelligence and charisma become 1, they can't cast spells, they can't activate magic items, they can't talk or read or communicate in any intelligible way. They still know who their allies are, they can follow them, they can even protect them if they have a non-magical way to do so, and it lasts for 30 days, at which point they can try to save against it again, which means it could happen to them again. It can be removed by a Greater Restoration, Heal, or Wish spell. My first exposure to the spell Feeblemind was on Critical Role. It wasn't cast that many times, less than 5 across the entire first campaign. Delilah Briarwood cast it on Tiberius, Gatekeeper Xanthus cast it on Allura. It gets cast in a future episode we haven't discussed on this channel yet, so I won't get into that spoiler just yet. But the most iconic casting of the spell came when Keyleth cast it on Raishan. This super intelligent, ancient green dragon who's both an evil genius / criminal mastermind and a 17th level spellcaster who still had quite a lot of spell slots left, was now reduced to a drooling, feral monster. It was poetic justice. It was the perfect culmination of Keyleth's character arc, and it was intensely satisfying. But there's a selfish aspect to this as well. In our old actual play campaign, Friday Night Quests, during an epic battle in a high-level adventure, my character cast Feeblemind on an enemy spellcaster, some sort of evil priest. And it was this epic moment because she hadn't had a chance to act in combat yet, and there were a lot of other enemies on the battlefield. She was going to do a lot of awful stuff to probably make them a lot more powerful or make us weaker and more vulnerable against these physically formidable allies. Before she could actually get a chance to do any of that to us, I snuffed out her intellect, and she wasn't going to be a danger to us for another 30 days. And what followed was this really epic fight. We fought a bunch of blackguards and anti-paladins and a fire giant. We recruited a dragon to help us eliminate this whole army of enemies. It was an excellent battle. And then, when the fight was over, I turned to this helpless woman who no longer posed a threat to us, who literally didn't even know who we were or who she was anymore. And I started attacking her. And suddenly this epic, triumphant moment turned really sour.
She came out of the tent, but she's like kind of wandering around aimlessly.
I walk over to her.
Okay.
I'm going to cast Cone of Cold on her.
Oh boy.
She's not really hurting anybody.
So, we could take her prisoner and
yeah,
get information from her.
I was thinking about taking her prisoner.
You're just gonna cold blast her?
Wait.
Okay.
Constitution saving throw.
Oh, God.
I mean, she's still alive.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to cast Fireball on her.
Oh, God.
Well, she's gonna swing at you.
Okay, that's fine. She doesn't know anything.
Sweetie, she's defenseless. You already took her
We don't
mind.
let people live anymore. Did we not learn our lesson?
This is a truly troubling scene.
That's
of
why I'm gonna try to stop
him. Bloodlust.
I'm
Of
gonna say,
you're like in the rain and mud. It's dark. There's lightning, and you're just like cracking lightning and cold into this poor enfeebled woman as she's swinging like wildly at you.
It was truly the darkest moment my character had in that entire campaign, where he was the worst version of himself, getting tackled to the ground by his other fellow party members, still shooting lightning bolts from the ground at this basically defenseless, mind-wiped woman. And part of what made that moment so truly awful, such a heinous moment for my character, was essentially that his trauma, basically his PTSD from what had happened the last time they let someone live and suffer the consequences, that meant that he was now willing to attack someone who not only wasn't a threat, but genuinely had literally no knowledge of what she had done to them, and barely any animosity towards us anymore. It is a scene that was as horrible as it was because the spell completely wiped her mind, and it is not a scene that would be possible without that spell. And now, appropriately, I guess, that spell does not exist anymore. Instead, we have a replacement, Befuddlement, a spell that is so different that it literally can't share the same name, but it still very much fills a similar role in the game. This is the replacement. With this spell, the target takes 10d12 psychic damage and can no longer cast spells or take the magic action, which once again means that they also can't activate magic items. So far, very similar, just with higher damage. But in this case, there's no loss to the target's intelligence and charisma. They're still the same person, they just don't have access to magic anymore. I pointed this out in my video about spellcasting and describing your magic, but it's very similar to the Avatar universe, where somebody takes away somebody's bending. They're still the same person, but obviously they're not going to be as much of a threat in combat anymore. Only now, unlike with Feeblemind, the victim of the Befuddlement spell still has access to any of their martial training they might have had. If they're a character who also uses weapons, they can still act strategically. They can still have access to all their battle training, they can still command other troops, they can still act logically in combat. I suspect that's why the new spell deals more damage now, because it's going to help balance it a little bit more, since you're not completely wiping every opponent off the field now. You're neutralizing a magical opponent, but they're not as completely helpless as before. However, this might be a more interesting spell to roleplay now. I'm not sure. I mean, we did just talk about 2 examples where the spell was cast on a villain, and those both went on to become one of my favorite Critical Role moments and one of my favorite Friday Night Quest moments for extremely different reasons. However, okay, as much as I miss Feeblemind, I like that spell a lot. I have a lot of nostalgia for that spell. I think both of those scenes were as impactful as they were because of that spell. Honestly, part of me does wonder if both of those scenes would have still been extremely interesting if those characters had Befuddlement cast on them instead of Feeblemind. What would have happened if Raishan had lost all her magic and still been this incredibly dangerous dragon, but now she was conscious of the fact that she knew there was no way she could cast this ritual that they'd come to her lair to cast. She may have changed targets in battle, prioritized a different enemy, but she would have been devastated, would have been angry and enraged. I can imagine Matt Mercer role-playing a character who has lost the only hope she had of getting what she wanted, and was now a caged beast with nothing to lose, but still intelligent and able to react strategically. That would have been interesting. I love the moment that we got, but, you know, it still would have been kind of fascinating with befuddlement instead. And for our own campaign, for Friday Night Quests, imagine the reaction my fellow players would have had if the War Priest had actually been able to react and respond, if she'd still been sapient enough to be a mustache-twirling villain instead of being literally helpless and essentially innocent now. The same moral debate, do we kill this person who doesn't pose a threat anymore, but now the target is aware of what's going on and maybe has this shit-eating grin on her face. That also would have been very interesting. Additionally, as we saw with Tiberius and another character in episode 100, when a player gets hit with a Feeblemind spell and their character loses all their intelligence and charisma, they don't really know how to roleplay it. How do you play a character who has an intelligence and charisma of 1? But now if an enemy casts befuddlement on you, you are still playing the same character, just without your magic. That is a much easier thing to visualize. It's probably going to be still somewhat frustrating. It's meant to be a frustrating spell, but I have to imagine that it's going to be so much less frustrating than literally playing someone who's a caveman now. So as much as I miss Feeblemind, and it is a shame that we would never get a moment quite as profoundly poetic as the Raishan battle if befuddlement had been cast on her instead, honestly, the chances of it working were so remote, it would be effectively impossible to replicate in your own game anyway. So if I set aside the more nostalgic side of things, I can understand the change. I can get behind why this is probably a good move strategically for the game, and I can acknowledge that just because it worked out well in one game doesn't mean that every game is going to have the same experience anyway, so that's not a good reason to hold on to what we lost. That being said, there are still some changes that I don't understand. In Memorium, backgrounds. Okay, obviously there are still backgrounds in D&D 5.5. I don't miss backgrounds in general. However, every background used to come with a feature, usually something that would benefit you in roleplay or downtime. For example, the noble could seek an audience with other nobles. The folk hero could find accommodations, as could the entertainer. The sage could do research. The sailor can get their hands on a ship. The soldier can pull rank on other military members, and so on. These were perfect for the way my friends and I ran our games. These were basically these levers we could pull to either initiate interesting role-playing scenes or bypass logistics that we didn't have another way to handle. I liked these, and weirdly, I think backgrounds got this negative reputation in some corners of the D&D community because your background didn't really have a strict mechanical benefit. All this stuff is more flavor-focused. But these options perfectly matched with our playstyle. Not all of them were created equal. There were definitely some that we didn't care about at all. It's why my favorite is the Noble, because it was basically the D&D equivalent of saying, I'd like to speak with your manager. It could get you in a room with a mayor or a baron or a king, and that was always going to be really interesting. I like these background features a lot. But most of all, I love the list of personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws you could find in each background. These are such a helpful resource for coming up with a personality for your character. They were such a great way to think about how your background informed the type of character you might be, while still giving you a lot of freedom to play different kinds of characters. And for a lot of people, they were a fantastic alternative to alignment. After all, we don't tend to think of ourselves in terms of lawful, or good, or chaotic, or neutral, that kind of thing. Okay, well, maybe we do. I run a D&D channel, so I know I do. You're watching a D&D channel, so you might. We're nerds. But most people don't. Most people do have some sort of ideology, some sort of belief, maybe even a mantra. They might not always state them on such plain terms as you might find in these charts, but this is a lot closer to understanding how real people approach the world. And even taking alignment out of the equation entirely, I've run the game for a lot of new players. I've helped a lot of them create their characters, and this list of resources was always so useful. So of course we got something that I think is just worse. First of all, backgrounds were changed a lot because people wanted backgrounds to matter more mechanically, because God forbid there's something in this game that is only there for fun flavor. But you know what? Fair enough. These background traits were not all created equal, so if you just replace each of these traits with a feat, which is what they've done instead, you can use that as a way to balance backgrounds against each other because you're focusing on making sure the feats are balanced. Okay, I get it. I'm not wild about it because I personally liked the old system, but I do agree that the old system was flawed in ways that this approach is not. Okay. But when it comes to the personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws, I don't know, man. I made hundreds of characters and I never got tired of them. I saw how much they helped new players get into their own characters. I don't think they were bad design at all. I really like them. The closest thing we have now instead are these charts that you can use to come up with your own descriptions of your personality based on your ability scores and your alignment. And I guess maybe if I try to imagine this from the perspective of the designers, I can understand the value of this approach. I really like that the personality traits and ideals and bonds and flaws gave you a very clear, prescribed idea that you could use to find your character. Something like, everyone else who sees a hellhound turns and runs, I stop and take notes. That is a very clear pathway into understanding a character. However, with these other charts, if you got a result like just curious and that's all you get, you could still come up with the same idea, a character who's more curious than cautious. However, something like curious could also give you someone who just asks a lot of questions in like an annoying way, like Donkey from Shrek. Or you could reinterpret it instead as someone who's sort of a relentless investigator when they learn about a mystery, like a dog with a bone. So I guess technically there is more flexibility here, and yeah, there are benefits to that for sure. There's also an opportunity for you to tie these into whether or not you have a high or low ability score, which means you could use these not at all if you already have an idea for your character, or you could roll on the charts for just your highest and your lowest score, or you could roll for all your scores. Rather than just the one option you're taking from each chart of your background, you can kind of keep collecting personality traits as much as you want through this method and build a more well-rounded character, which I guess I understand that as well. Additionally, you have the other charts that are based off of your alignment. On the one hand, I do think it's very funny that people praised the traits, bonds, flaws, and ideal system for giving you an alternative to alignment, and the designer's response to that was not to remove alignment, like so many people insisted would improve the game, but instead to tie these charts more closely to alignment. Like, objectively, that is a very funny response to that criticism. No notes at all. But that being said, one of the goals of the ideals of the old system was to give you a sense of what alignment might line up with your character that you want to play. The ideal would suggest a category of alignment, like lawful, or chaotic, or neutral, that kind of thing. And I liked that approach. It wasn't always perfect, but it was a good way to try to tie the alignment into your personality, into your ideals. This is just kind of the reverse, where your personality traits can give you a way to play that character, which is still helpful. I don't know if I would say it's as helpful, because I like that the old system gave you some idea for a starting point for your character's alignment. But this is a solid second place option. If we're going with a system where you choose your alignment first, which is the thing that I'm not crazy about, but that's what they seem to want to do, but within that system, this is a great way to develop your personality traits so you can figure out your character based on your alignment. I'm trying not to come into this hating anything that's different by default. I want to try to understand the logic behind some of these changes. In this case, I think we lost more than we gained. I don't really understand the logic behind getting rid of the previous method. That's even something that had started happening in the later books in 5th edition's lifespan, like Spelljammer, and I was very open that I did not like that they were removing these charts from backgrounds, even back then. I'm sure the designers at D&D have a reason for it, but clearly, I've never really understood why. But obviously, they were unsatisfied with that system, they didn't think it was working, and that sucks because I really liked it. But if you're going to replace that system, a thing that I wish they had not done, then at least they've replaced it with something that I do think works, that is still interesting in its own way. It's worse, at least I think so, but I don't think it's just because it's worse that means it's inherently bad design when evaluated on its own merits. I don't like it as much as what we had in 2014 D&D, but I don't hate it either. And you know what, at least they replaced it with something. Not everything I loved from 2014 D&D was quite so lucky. In Memorium. Disclaimers. Some of you might not even know this, but at the bottom of the credits page for every D&D book, from 2014 up until whatever the last book was before the 2024 Player's Handbook, there was a funny little disclaimer. For example, here was the first one from the 2014 Player's Handbook. Disclaimer. Wizards of the Coast is not responsible for the consequences of splitting up the party, sticking appendages in the mouth of a leering green devil face, accepting a dinner invitation from bugbears, storming the feast hall of a hill giant steading, angering a dragon of any variety, or saying yes when the DM asks, "Are you really sure?" They were just this fun little joke, written in an overly corporate jargon, but they were actually very silly. And they were kind of a nice wink towards the D&D community. It was the kind of dry humor I really appreciate, especially from the designers behind D&D. This one's from Out of the Abyss. Disclaimer. Before you take on demon lords, consult a physician. Do not drink alcohol while taking on demon lords. Taking alcohol on demon lords may increase your risk of death. Other side effects of demon lords may include hallucinations, mindless rage, gluttony, greed, paranoia, self-delusion, bestial urges, nihilism, hedonism, megalomania, a messiah complex, cannibalism, multiple personalities, and homicidal psychosis. Now, humor is subjective. You might not think these are as funny as I do. In truth, most of the time when a D&D book tries to be funny, it does not work for me. Curse of Strahd has a bunch of tombs in the crypts below the castle that have tongue-in-cheek jokes on them. It's meant to be sort of like the Haunted Mansion, but I just don't think any of them are nearly as funny as I think they are. Certainly they feel like the wrong tone for what I think works about that adventure. But some other official adventures have other jokes in them, like joke characters or some sort of weird character quirk or a goofy magic item, and most of them just don't land for me. But these disclaimers just worked for me a lot better. I like their vibe a whole lot more. One of the first things I would do every time I got a new D&D product is flip to the credits page and skim down to the bottom to find the disclaimer. This one's from the Tomb of Annihilation. Disclaimer. This adventure will make your players hate you. The kind of simmering hatred that eats away at their souls until all that remains are dark little spheres of annihilation where their hearts used to be. P.S. Don't forget to tear up their character sheets. And you know what? I once wrote a whole video that I never made where I talked about all the reasons I liked these disclaimers, and I tried to explain how they were somehow good for the game, like on a moral level. For example, I was going to argue that they introduced in-jokes that you could then figure out by reading the book itself, so they're kind of welcoming new people into the hobby in a weird way. Or how they present the idea that these NPCs and monsters in the book are real and pose a threat to you, and how that was actually a clever reference to the fact that the Forgotten Realms used to be linked to Earth, and that's part of the lore that's since been, well, forgotten. Or how these disclaimers were a sign that the game designers didn't take the game too seriously. They were aware of the corporate jargon that people sort of expect from them, and that having an acknowledgement of that is actually really healthy for the hobby. Or how these disclaimers were actually teaching Dungeon Masters how to be funny in the game in a way that I think works better than just trying to make normal jokes, because I have a lot of very particular ideas about whether or not DMs should joke along with the players or if they should be much more dry, much in the way these disclaimers are. I had a whole video all done, all ready to go about that, but honestly, none of those are the real reasons I like these disclaimers. That's all me trying to find a justification for why I would like them to continue. The honest truth is, I thought they were funny, I liked them, and I miss them. Because now they're gone. And they weren't replaced with anything. And look, I realize that I am way too focused on one paragraph in each book that most people didn't care about, and a lot of people didn't even notice existed. But I liked it. It was a really fun feature of 5th edition, and it didn't stick around. And it wasn't removed because they rebalanced the game. It wasn't removed because they were trying to be more inclusive. It wasn't removed for any clear reason. They just, I don't know, they just gave up on these. Now, I'm glad they finished doing them through all the books up until the 2024 Player's Handbook. So that way they are officially in all of the 5e books, and there's a very clear line in the sand when we get to 5.5 that they're not included in those. Okay, fair enough. At least the completionist in me is glad that all the 5e books had them. But there's really no reason they couldn't have just kept doing these forever.
Nothing lasts forever.
Who are you? Are you the ghost of Abraham Lincoln?
I am an angel.
Oh, I mean, well, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you freed the slaves. If that doesn't earn you your wings, I don't think anything would.
I am not Abraham Lincoln. I am the angel of change.
You're a change angel? A changeal?
Definitely not that. I am here to remind you change is not a bad thing. In fact, it's healthy. Even things people like have to change eventually. You may not agree with every change, but ultimately, all changes happen for a reason. All you can do is try to understand the reason why and see if you agree with that.
Okay, I get that when it comes to mechanics and balance. Like, I might have a lot of nostalgia for Feeblemind, but if I try to get into the headspace of the designers, I can imagine some reasons they might have changed it. Fair enough. But come on, couldn't they just keep putting those joke disclaimers in every book, just for me?
Perhaps they felt restricted by the disclaimers. As they headed into a new edition, they wanted to make sure they felt freedom from the expectations that everything would feel exactly the same. They wanted to pave a new path for themselves, unbound from the shackles of the previous format.
Freedom? Shackles? You're not comparing writing these disclaimers to slavery, right?
No. Again, I'm not Abraham Lincoln. Not everything I say has anything to do with slavery. Look, certainly, you might have had a lot of nostalgia for a certain aspect of the game. Ultimately, the game is going to change. That's going to happen no matter what. You may or may not agree with every change made, but ultimately, you have a choice. You can accept change, or you can keep using these old features and understand that not every table you go to might support using them anymore.
Oh, so it's like the penny.
Yes, now you understand.
Yeah, they discontinued the penny last year. I don't know if everyone knew that. It was like the one good thing Donald Trump did last year, and you, by the way, absolutely do not have to hand it to him. He's still a fascist and a racist and a rapist and a pedophile. Sorry, I know he's in your party since you were also a Republican, but things have changed a lot since you were alive. You would not recognize the modern Republican Party.
Again, I'm not Lincoln.
But we're discontinuing the penny because they really no longer make sense in our current environment. They were still being used, but they were a lot less efficient than really justified their existence anymore. So eventually, despite the protesting of people who were extremely invested in the penny, financially, the US decided they weren't going to print them anymore. But they're still legal tender. You just have to be aware that if you're going to use them somewhere, you might have to prepare yourself. The more and more time passes, the less you should expect to see people still using them.
Right. The only difference is that a penny is still legal tender. You'll be able to use it at a lot more places than you'll be able to use the obsolete features from 2014 D&D. At least if you have exact change, and until more of these shops change their pricing and make pennies obsolete.
No, that's actually kind of perfect. Like the exact change thing. You can keep using pennies as long as they suit whatever it is you need to pay, and you're not expecting the vendor to help you out at all. That's more and more what we're going to see with the people who want to use the old, obsolete 2014 features. Sure, if you want to use a 2014 D&D compatible subclass from Ghostfire Gaming or an ancestry you find in an issue of Arcadia, your GM will probably help you figure out the best way to adapt it. That's not really a big deal. But if you want to use something that's been replaced in 2024 D&D, like the old Wizard or Wild Magic Sorcerer or Feeblemind, just because you like the old version better, your GM might still help you a little bit. But more and more people are gonna only will be willing to help you use these versions if it requires minimal work from them. Eventually, they're just gonna get phased out, just like a store phasing out pennies by eventually getting rid of their old stockpile and changing their pricing so you only need nickels and dimes anymore. Just like more and more tables are either gonna finish their current campaigns, getting rid of their stockpile, so to speak, and then they're going to change their pricing by either making the switch to D&D 2024 or playing a different game like Draw Steel or Daggerheart.
Sure. Kind of stretching the metaphor a bit, but I guess that works.
It's almost exactly the same as playing D&D. You might still want to use some of these old 2014 features, and if you ask nicely, your GM might allow you to use them. I mainly play with cool people. If I wanted to play with some feature of a 2014 subclass instead of a 2024 subclass, or an older version of a spell, my friends would probably let me. But as more people continue to use 2024 D&D, you're going to find fewer and fewer people who still want to try to figure out how to make these 2014 features work in their 2024 games, especially for the items that have explicitly been replaced in the new player's handbook. Eventually, you'll have tables that are only playing 2024 D&D and using 2014 options that weren't replaced or revised in a later release, stuff from other books or third-party products. Or if you really like the way 2014 D&D works and you don't like the way these options were changed, you and your friends will just keep playing 2014 D&D. But most people won't keep trying to have their foot in both camps.
Exactly. There's nothing wrong with holding on to the version of the game you enjoy the most. If you and your friends are still enjoying it, keep playing. That's okay. It's also fine to be critical of new changes if you don't think they accomplish what the designers were trying to achieve, or you feel like they might have some unintended consequences that can hurt the game in other ways, but there's a difference between thoughtful criticism and simple nostalgia.
Yeah, you're right. It's the difference between thinking something used to actually have better design, like the way backgrounds used to offer a lot of advice for players, and just reminiscing about a cool moment that was only possible because of an old design. I will definitely admit that a lot of my feelings about half-elves and Feeblemind and backgrounds are all wrapped up in the fact that these specific player options have been responsible for some of my favorite moments at the table, either in my own games or in something like Critical Role. But generally, I do try to think that it's healthier to not look backwards in this way. If you want to keep playing an old edition of the game, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. If you would theoretically be willing to move on to a new version, but you just specifically don't like these changes and you don't think 2024 is an improvement overall, again, there's nothing wrong with that either. But it's also important to actually recognize when we think something actually was handled better in the past, and when it's just nostalgia. We can criticize things we don't like about a new edition of the game, and we can talk about how older editions handled something better, and we can be frustrated when something we thought was working just fine winds up getting discarded. Even if we understand the change and the reason behind it, that doesn't mean we're not allowed to still be frustrated about it. But at the end of the day, we can't ignore the fact that when you play games like this, your own personal feelings and your positive associations with a previous version of the game are absolutely going to get tied up in your reactions as a critic or as a designer. And so it doesn't do anybody any good to fold your arms and just say that you don't like change.
I understand change can be scary. There's a reason people so often retreat to the familiar. It's comforting. It's safe. And the beauty of this hobby is that if you don't want to use the new version, you can just stick with what you like as long as your friends are willing to do so. But it is still important to open your hearts to remembering the change can also be a good thing. It's okay to set down the familiar and try something new.
Exactly. And that's why I'm really excited for the opportunity to finally be a player in a D&D game where we are just playing 2024 D&D. And once I do, I'm looking forward to having a new favorite class and subclass and spell and species and feat once I've spent more time with the game.
Oh, that reminds me.
What's that?
That's your commission.
My commission?
Well, you just talked about how you're running 2024 games, and you're looking forward to using the 2024 options the next time you get a chance to be a player.
Right.
So there's your money from Wizards of the Coast, you Hasbro shell.
What?
I can't believe someone who calls himself a leftist would glaze a massive, soulless corporation the way you do.
Huh?
If you still like 2014 D&D, make sure you play it while you still have the chance before the Pinkertons come and steal your books.
What the fuck? Hey, thanks so much for watching this video. Came out a little longer than I was expecting. I am going to make short videos again someday. In the meantime, if you like this video, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, ring the bell, do all the stuff that lets YouTube know that you liked it and you want to see more videos like it. If you want to support the channel financially and commission a video like this one, or probably I'm not going to change as many of the criteria you give me. This one was sort of special circumstance because a new version of the game came out since this request came in. But if you want to see videos specific about specific topics, you can go ahead and commission them on my Patreon. If you want to do other things on my Patreon, like check out behind the scenes stuff, this script was actually available early on Patreon. So if that sounds interesting to you, check out the Patreon. I've also got a live stream coming up exclusive for patrons. Should be next week. More details coming soon, or on screen. I haven't decided yet when it is, but I might have decided by the time this comes out. Probably Monday, actually, would be my guess. But if you want to support the channel in other ways, let me know. If you would buy a shirt that has the Angel of Change on it. Can I legally use that? Yeah, it's just a penny, right? There's no legal issue with that. Also, would you still buy a shirt with Odwick on it? I know he's kind of, like, gone from the channel, but, like, I never got around to making merch last year, and I want to. So if you would buy an Odwick shirt, like, let me know in the comments below. Other than that, I will see you next time. Watch these videos, also, this video also, whatever that is. I haven't decided, but there's going to be one here. I'm trying this thing where I don't script the ending, and this might be a disaster, or it might be in all my videos. We'll see. Until next time, play fair, and have fun.